Hello, hello, Blackjack here, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the symbol of peace, All Might. More specifically, we're going to be talking about the symbols of the symbol of peace. Bit confusing, yes, but you'll get what I mean. Now, you probably don't need anybody to tell you that My Hero Academia is based heavily on Western comic books, most obvious being Marvel and DC. One look at All Might will tell you that he is very, very heavily based on American heroes just by looking at his shading style. He looks completely different than anyone else in the series, mostly because he's drawn with thick black lines harkening back to Superman and that sort of thing. Most of the time, characters have a very flat, simplistic shading style that works really well for a manga, whereas My Hero author Kohei Horikoshi actually mentions that drawing All Might uses up usually at least one or two of his pen nibs, which gives him a much more tangible shading that you see in a lot of Western comics. And speaking of Superman, well, just look at this page from the first chapter of the manga, and you'll see him along with Spider-Man and Wolverine, along with a bunch of Japanese heroes. I'm going to focus on Superman because it's clear that in addition to his style, All Might shares a lot of elements with his design and actual character. Both are the number one hero of their respective universes, both are able to just punch away most villains, and both proudly wear blue, yellow, and red in their costumes. And most notably, both even have an unassuming alter ego that isn't really a disguise so much it is just people not paying enough attention. Another huge connection with Western comic books is that All Might literally had eras of his iconic costumes. Characters even reference the fact that he shows up to class in a Silver Age costume. This refers to the different ages you see in Western comic books. There was the Golden Age where things kind of got their start, and the one in question, the Silver Age, is where things got sort of campy and over the top, the thing that All Might exemplifies. And then there's the sort of Bronze Age where things got a bit darker, a bit more serious, and gradually evolved in the more modern style we see now, which other characters in the series take design elements from, including the spin-off manga My Hero Vigilantes. But in addition to Superman, a recent interview with Horikoshi actually revealed that he had another comic book influence when designing All Might, and that was Mike Mignola's Hellboy. I don't really know about Hellboy himself all that much, but what I do know is that if you look at him, you can definitely see how he influenced All Might's design. In particular, Horikoshi himself mentions Mignola's way of drawing hands had a large influence early on, which comes into play multiple times. A lot of characters in My Hero have a very huge focus on their hands. Horikoshi also mentions that hands are one of his favorite ways of having characters express themselves, which you can see a lot in Ida. Hellboy notably has a large stone hand, which may have influenced All Might's design, and maybe the focus on hands itself. And if we look at Hellboy's design as a whole, he's also got that really wide upper body and comparatively smaller lower half, forming that huge triangle shape. And while it probably isn't a reference, that triangle shape does kind of have a history with comic books. I'm sure most of you know Rob Liefeld's earlier work. Going back to Hellboy, something that I do know about him is that he usually has horns, but he shaves them off. Again, it might not be intentional, but if we look at him with his horns, kind of looks a bit like All Might, doesn't it? At least in that it's two large, pointy objects coming off of his head. At the very least, it gives All Might a very clear silhouette, much like Hellboy. And with some of All Might's influences out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about his actual design. His primary design communicates quite a bit about his character right out of the gate. And that works really well with his actual story, considering one of the things he does is he literally tries to make himself look as iconic as possible for the purposes of being the symbol of peace. One of the intros even points out that his hair looks like a peace sign. Standing in a towering 7'2", All Might radiates strength. Literally towering over evil, his rippling muscles are accentuated thanks to the harsh black shading, showing off his limitless power. The extra shading really helps in this way because he stands out so much, yet nobody knows anything about him. The extra shading works so well with his design because in addition to emphasizing his muscles, his face is almost always in shadow. He's an enigmatic figure, and that's by design. Despite being the number one hero, no one knows his name or his quirk. They just know him as the symbol of peace. That's because he engineered it. All Might literally tries to make himself a symbol more than he is a person. Something that people can flock to and something that villains can be scared of. His design communicates everything that you need to know about him. His strength, his enigmatic figure, and the fact that he's fading. At the end of the very first chapter, when he shows up, Horikoshi put a little bio of All Might at the end. If you take a look at the bottom, Horikoshi points out that part of the reason his face is always in black is because it's supposed to be thin and gaunt. Even then, he points out that his pupils are always visible. He literally sees that the world needs the symbol of peace, and that determination shows. In fact, if we look at Two Heroes, the movie that came out recently, we see All Might when he's very young, and he lacks the shadows around his eyes. This contrast alone communicates that he's become weaker or something happened in between the time of his debut and where he is now. Another thing about the Two Heroes movie that shows is that All Might got his start in America, which had an influence on him, to say the least. Like Superman, All Might wears very patriotic colors, and his ultimate moves are named after American cities and states. This makes for a lot of really eye-catching outfits, and calling out your attack names like that is perfect for a person who wants people to know that he's there. His initial outfit goes all in with the American theme, being mostly red, white, and blue. Two Heroes even reveals that All Might's American friend, David Shield, was the one to design his outfit. Whether or not it was his decision, All Might rolls with it. Even in his early years, All Might literally names a move after David's home state.
California!
Showing that he's perfectly fine being considered American. In fact, other characters aren't even sure if he's Japanese. Endeavor makes a quip about him being American, though All Might embraces it. Even in a world with people with tentacle hands and being made out of rock, I guess it's just easy to confuse him as American. Which works perfectly for him being based on American comic book heroes. This brings us to something that I want to talk about regarding his design, and it persists through all of his hero outfits. While I think that All Might is a great design and definitely iconic, I feel like he actually kind of lacks an icon. For a series that constantly reinforces the idea of a symbol of peace, All Might doesn't really have a sort of symbol. And that's the one thing that he really didn't take from Western comic book heroes. For example, Superman has that large S on his chest. I'm told it means hope. I shouldn't have to tell you who these logos belong to, because they're well ingrained with the characters. I'm not saying that a logo is something that a hero needs to be a hero, but I do find it kind of odd giving All Might's influences. What's weirder is that Horikoshi does think about the costumes in that iconic sort of way, but once removed. At one point he mentioned that Uraraka and Bakugo's costumes were made by the same designer. You can tell because they both have that designer's trademark, which is the two black dots at the neck area. So a designer is more iconic than All Might in this respect. Iconography is really important in the My Hero world. Deku's hero costume is unashamedly based on All Might's, copying two of his iconic features, the hair and the smile, but not any sort of logo. For a big a fanboy as he is, Deku kind of ignores what seems to be the actual logo of All Might, which is the thing on his belt. I hesitate to even call it an icon, because if Deku is willing to call himself Mighty Boy or All Might Jr. or Mighty whatever, he doesn't really care about the logo. At no point is it really ever mentioned in the story, aside from Deku wearing it as a kid. I mean, yeah, it's there, but I wouldn't give it the sort of gravity I'd give the Batman logo or the Superman S. I mean, All Might's signature is kind of the same thing with the hair spikes and his eyes, but it's not really given any sort of gravity aside from that one autograph. In fact, if we go back to Deku's hero costume, he specifically copied two things. And while it may be cheesy, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that All Might's iconic logo is... his smile. After all, he saves everyone with a smile to let them know that he is here. Yeah, honestly, his smile is more iconic than his actual logo, and even his catchphrase, considering Vigilante's Knuckle Duster botches it the first time he shows up. And that's what I have to say about All Might the Hero. But let's go ahead and talk about Small Might, or rather Toshinori Yagi, All Might's true form. In short, it's brilliant. All Might's true form perfectly sums up the existence of the symbol of peace, and that is a man trying to hide his true self in order to let his actions stand on their own. His deflated form is everything he tries to distance himself with, and that's him being a tired, weak old man. He can no longer hide his true form behind his thick shading, and even his iconic peace sign hair has fallen all over his face, and what was neatly kept before is now a shaggy mass. All of the strength you could see in his rippling muscles has faded away into a more skeleton figure. Even though he's still taller than most of the cast, he's still small and thin and weak. Really, the metaphor of him not fitting into his clothes makes perfect sense and works perfectly for who he is. Yeah, he wears really big and baggy clothes because he might need to transform and go fight villains, but it doesn't fit. He doesn't fit. It's a man not willing to face the facts and just settle down. He can't be a hero forever, and his body shows that. But despite all of this weakness and all of this refusal to give up, his people still glisten. Honestly, I don't think there's a more perfect way to sum up All Might's true form than this cover right here. Despite wearing his iconic hero costume, All Might can quite literally no longer fit into his role as the hero of peace, and it's up to the next generation to take his place. In the words of Horikoshi, this reflects the true strength and dignity of the symbol of peace. It's a brilliant illustration of the weaknesses that All Might hides, while also showing off that he will never stop being the same hero. And with that, we're done. I think Horikoshi did an excellent job designing All Might, both his muscle form and his true form. Both the designs come together to display the strength All Might shows to the world, and the weaknesses he hides from it. And as for the next symbol of peace, well, maybe we'll talk about Deku another time. That's a hint, we're going to be talking about Deku another time. If you want to hear my thoughts about him and the rest of Class A, consider subscribing. And if you like my videos, let me know. If not, tell me what I can fix. And if you want me to keep making videos, consider donating to my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something new. Blackjack out.